So it's becoming pretty clear that this new iPhone SE is incredible value in terms of the power and the camera you can get for $399. But the one question mark I've had ever since I first saw the spec sheet is battery. The iPhone SE on the far left comes fitted with an 1821 mAh cell, which, I mean, that's the smallest battery I've had in one of these tests for years, and when you compare it to its iPhone and Android counterparts, it almost looks like something's wrong. But Apple promises a full day of battery, and they're not normally wrong about that, so we're gonna test it, but I'm having my doubts. That said, if you have a look at the current level of battery on each, all three iPhones are still showing 100% compared to the Android phones, which have both lost a little bit. It's worth mentioning that, yes, whilst this iPhone SE does have a tiny capacity battery, it does have a few things that should help it last longer. It's tiny. I mean, just look at the iPhone SE versus the iPhone 11 it's sitting next to, which even in itself is not considered to be a huge phone, and it'll give you an idea of how small the SE's display is. Combine that with the fact that the screen it does have is low resolution and that it only refreshes 60 times per second compared to Samsung, which can do 120, and OnePlus, which can do 90, this is all going to save battery too. I mean, don't get me wrong, these aren't positive features. I'm not saying this is a selling point to the phone, but the lack of these features will help to save some juice. If we have a look at the battery capacity of it now though, wow, it has lost some juice. You know, we've only just passed the hour mark in this test, and it's already barely at 80%. On these battery comparisons, I tend to say that if a phone can hit 5 hours, that's fine, that's good battery. If it can hit 6, that's great. 7 plus, amazing. But I'm not so sure the iPhone SE is even going to hit 5 at this rate. We're just launching into a new game now. This is called God Punch, I think, and it's kind of perfect for a battery test because it plays itself. So while that's running, people have already been asking me, why am I not comparing the iPhone SE to Google's Pixel 3a or other similarly priced phones? Well, it's two things. First of all, that I think that a lot of the phones that are actually going to properly compete against the iPhone SE, price-wise, are coming soon. For example, Google's Pixel 4a is just around the corner, and supposedly a budget phone from OnePlus too. And the second thing is that I think a bigger question people are asking now is not, is this new iPhone SE as good as other $400 competitors, but more about, is it worth spending more? Is this iPhone SE good enough, or will I get better if I spend $700? And that's the question that this test is answering. The iPhone SE is the cheapest phone here, so obviously its specs won't side by side completely match up to the other phones, but we're looking at the question of, is it good enough? On that note though, if we have a look at the battery percentages again, it's having a rough time. We're talking single digit rough, and it's all but cemented itself as the phone that's gonna die first now. And this isn't a one-off incident. Oh, there it goes now. This is exactly what I noticed when I've been using the SE. For example, my camera comparison. If you haven't seen that video, I'll link it up here somewhere. But whilst I was filming that, the SE was the first time in a long time that I've had to actually pause the filming of my camera comparison just so I can charge up the battery again. I will say though, just in defense of the iPhone SE, that its standby battery drain is almost zero. So during a normal day, while the battery will sip pretty fast while you're actively using the phone, it'll probably lose next to nothing while it's sitting in your pocket, not being used. So it's not like the phone will be dead by lunchtime. Right, so SE is dead, we are past the 4-hour mark, so just before I fast forward this test and get to the results, let's just see how far ahead these other phones are. If you're wondering, by the way, I've set all phones to equivalent settings. So the same brightness, 50% speaker volume, Wi-Fi on, Bluetooth on, location on. I'm trying to create a slightly more intensive than average usage case scenario to compensate for the fact that in a normal day you also have to worry about battery lost on standby in between uses, which tests like these can't really factor in. There goes iPhone 11, RIP, and while I have been kind of focusing on what's happening with the iPhones on this test, bear in mind that OnePlus has silently slipped into first place, which I guess you kind of expect. You know, it's got the biggest battery of the bunch, and its display only refreshes at 90 Hz compared to 120 on the Samsung, which these are both better than the 60 that all the iPhones use. In the short window of time that I've been using the OnePlus 8, I've had no less than 3 major software updates, so it's possible that OnePlus has actually been improving the battery life over time. Now, going back to the SE for a minute, I'm getting a lot of people asking me, why did Apple make this phone? Surely as a company that focuses on exclusive high-end devices, they're damaging their own brand reputation by making something so affordable. And to answer that, I would say maybe, to some really small extent, but there's two main things going on here. First of all, the very fact that I'm currently comparing this against $700 plus phones goes to show that really at $400 right now, there aren't many viable competitors. This price bracket used to be incredibly heavily contested a few years ago, but since then, the companies that used to be $400 have now kind of trickled upwards into higher price brackets. And secondly, building a cut price phone and then dropping it into a market where there's barely any strong competition is a great way of turning loads of potential Android users into Apple users who will use Apple's App Store, their Apple Music, Apple Maps, and all sorts of Apple services, which is great for the company. Anyways, there is one phone left, so we're just going to fast forward all the way and get straight to the results. In 5th place is iPhone SE with a time of 3 hours and 46 minutes. And even though in a day-to-day scenario, when you're not using it for 3 hours of continuous screen on time, it'll feel like more than that, I can't get behind actively recommend you buy a phone with endurance like this. Even if you're not even a power user, even with medium usage, this is probably not going to cut it. iPhone 11 though is quite a lot better, with almost bang on 5 hours. And it's also helped by the fact that, again, this phone will lose almost nothing on standby, compared to, let's say, my Samsung phone, which will slowly trickle away even when I'm not using it. Next up is Galaxy S20, which lasted a lot longer. It was only been set to full HD resolution, but what makes this result more impressive is the fact that this whole test it's been running at 120Hz screen refresh rate, which naturally will take more of a toll on the battery. iPhone 11 Pro was next, and while this phone does only run at 60Hz, it does so at a higher default screen resolution. And it's a compact phone. You generally expect compact phones to have less endurance. And finally, by a landslide, is the OnePlus 8. And I did a battery test not too long ago where I compared this against all the plus-sized, top-level flagships, and compared to them it was towards the bottom end of the pile, whereas compared to this group of smaller, cheaper phones, it's actually doing really well. But I would say that even though you can't really compare results between battery tests because I'm running different applications in all of them, the result of this phone has improved so much that I can only assume OnePlus has issued some sort of patch which improves battery life. Anyways, thanks a lot for watching, and let me know if you prefer this style of battery test where you can actually see my face as well. With that being said, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.